and what time it is for you. It's always a little thrill to see the world join us, one sleepy mind at a time. Now, imagine a world where mortals and gods share the same streets, the same homes, and occasionally the same headaches. A world where beauty is a burden, curiosity has consequences, and the heart, or the gods, can be terribly capricious. This is the story of Psyche, a mortal girl whose charm rivals the gods themselves, and Cupid, the god of love, whose job is supposed to be simple, make people fall in love. But when family drama, divine jealousy, and mysterious houses of impossible luxury collide, well, let's just say things don't go as smoothly as Cupid would like. So pull your blanket a little tighter, soften your gaze, and let us drift slowly into the tangled, whimsical, and occasionally exasperating world of Cupid and Psyche. If you've ever felt like family drama was a little too much, imagine having the entire pantheon of Greek gods as relatives. Now, take that image and make the stakes slightly higher. Lightning bolts, eternal beauty, and a tendency to meddle in ways that no human court could possibly understand. This is the world that Psyche was born into, a world where gods marry gods, gods argue with mortals, and mortals occasionally survive the wrath of the divine. Let's take a moment to pause and consider that the Greek gods were, in many ways, a lot like the extended family you never asked for, but with better powers and worse judgment. Now, you may have heard of Aphrodite, goddess of beauty, goddess of love, goddess of complicated feelings and irrational grudges. On the surface, Aphrodite seems untouchable, flawless, radiant, the sort of being who walks into a room and literally changes the air pressure with her charm. But beneath all that golden glow is a little thing called insecurity, which, as we shall see, can make immortality a lot less relaxing than it sounds. It turns out that even goddesses have a hard time with attention. Aphrodite, despite being the very embodiment of allure, hated being ignored. And here's where it gets interesting. Mortals can be far too obedient in admiring her, and sometimes, occasionally, a mortal looks so striking, so flawless, that even the goddess feels a twinge of, well, let's call it annoyance. And that's how Psyche enters our story. You see, Psyche wasn't born with lightning bolts in her hands or a chariot of swans at her command. She was a mortal girl, delicate and clever, and perhaps most dangerously, she was breathtakingly beautiful. Not a few villagers whispered compliments beautiful. Not your parents can't stop staring beautiful. But legendary, paintings could never capture her properly beautiful. Now, it may seem like being gorgeous is a gift. And, well, sometimes it is. But in the ancient Greek world, beauty carried a price. For Psyche, it became less of a blessing and more of a kind of curse, like being given a gold coin that weighs a ton or a house with no doors. Everywhere she went, people would stop, gawk, and, whether they intended to or not, set events into motion that even the cleverest human couldn't predict. It is said that villagers began worshipping Psyche, not because she had performed some heroic feat, but simply because of her appearance. Statues were erected in her honour, songs were sung about her, and while you might imagine she would be flattered, Psyche was, in reality, the unwitting centre of a storm she couldn't escape, and naturally no mortal getting this much attention goes unnoticed by the gods. Aphrodite, in particular, did not take kindly to sharing the limelight. It is perhaps one of the oldest problems in mythology. You cannot be the goddess of beauty if mortals are literally worshipping someone else instead. So we arrive at the central problem of our story. Psyche's beauty is so extraordinary that it provokes jealousy in a goddess. And when gods get jealous, they don't write passive-aggressive letters. They scheme, they manipulate, and occasionally they send in their offspring with arrows of love, quite literally to enforce a lesson or two. We'll see that Psyche's journey is not only one of love and curiosity, but of navigating a world where divine whims are law, mortal judgment is unreliable, and a simple walk through a garden can become a matter of life, death, or very inconvenient errands. One might pause here and wonder, in a world of gods, heroes, and monsters, how did mortals ever manage to eat breakfast without getting struck by lightning or kidnapped by a nymph? The answer, dear listener, is patience, luck, and perhaps a little bribery. In Psyche's case, she would need all three, and a fair share of ingenuity, if she was going to survive the coming events with her curiosity, her dignity, and most importantly, her heart intact. And so, we begin. Consider this. Sometimes being too beautiful is less a gift and more a polite invitation to trouble. In Psyche's story, trouble has a golden arrow, wings, and a habit of appearing exactly when you least expect it. If you thought surviving divine jealousy started when Psyche first appeared in the story, you'd be only partially correct. Before any godly wrath could descend, Psyche's mortal life had already begun to accumulate the kind of subtle complications that, in hindsight, seem almost inevitable. Psyche grew up in a quiet town, the sort of place where everyone knows your business before you do. Her parents were ordinary, though hard-working folk, content with the small routines of daily life, tending their fields, caring for their modest home, and occasionally muttering about the weather in tones that implied it could be catastrophic. They had no inkling that their daughter's beauty would eventually spark a theological crisis of epic proportions. Now, Psyche's beauty was not subtle. It was the kind of beauty that made villagers stop mid-conversation, drop their baskets of grain, and gaze with a mixture of awe and something bordering on fear. Men and women alike whispered her name in reverent tones, and strangers came from miles around just to catch a glimpse of her face. Not to buy bread, not to trade goods, but simply to admire her. In a world where divine beings demand constant attention, this should have been a warning sign. Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty herself, does not suffer well when her spotlight is shared. Imagine, if you will, the modern equivalent. Unfollowing the goddess of beauty on Instagram because everyone's attention has shifted to a mortal. And in a world without polite unfollows or blocking features, this was not merely inconvenient, it was a grave affront. The villagers, of course, had no idea they were fomenting divine resentment. They set up statues in Psyche's honour, composed songs about her charms, and told tales of her grace as though she were a demi-goddess. And in some sense they were right. Psyche's presence had the kind of effortless magnetism that could draw attention, tilt conversations, and occasionally make a particularly proud mother reconsider her child-rearing strategies. It's worth noting that in ancient times, admiration could take forms that seem strange to modern ears. Offerings of food at altars, carefully crafted garlands, even public praise in marketplaces were all ways to show respect. None of these would have seemed dangerous to a mortal family. But when a goddess sees the same gestures being lavished upon someone else, well, the reaction is less "thank you" and more "how dare you?" And dare she did. Aphrodite, despite her legendary beauty and charm, had what one might politely call a temper. Her legendary rage issues were not the stuff of casual gossip. They were the kind that could send storms across the seas, spark quarrels among other gods, or, as in Psyche's case, set the stage for a series of events so elaborate that even the most patient historian might grow weary recounting them. So while Psyche's mortal upbringing was humble and her life otherwise ordinary, her face, and the attention it drew, was already placing her at the epicenter of a storm. And in a world where divine grudges can last for centuries, one could argue that Psyche's first, most significant challenge wasn't a trial, a monster, or a puzzle. It was simply being herself. It's remarkable, in a way, how little control mortals had over their fates in these myths. Your birth, your beauty, even your tendency to look someone in the eye could alter the course of your life. Psyche, like many others, was caught in a web woven long before she drew her first breath. And yet, within this precarious stage, she also had the beginnings of agency. Small decisions, fleeting moments of courage, and eventually a willingness to take risks that would define her journey. By the time she reached adulthood, Psyche was no longer just the village girl who could make men drop their baskets of grain. She had become a living testament to the idea that humans, by virtue of their beauty or cleverness, could inadvertently challenge even the gods, and as we shall see, that challenge would not go unnoticed. So as we drift further into this tale, keep in mind, sometimes the greatest perils do not arrive with thunder or sword, but with a glance, a whispered compliment, or the simple act of existing too well in a world ruled by vanity, pride, and immortal grudges. Psyche had unwittingly stepped onto such a stage, one where admiration could provoke anger, where curiosity would be tested, and where the rules of mortals no longer applied. By now, you might be wondering how a goddess deals with someone daring to outshine her. Perhaps you imagine a polite note, delicately written on golden parchment, explaining that, "Dear mortal, Please tone down the beauty. Thank you. If so, I regret to inform you that this is not how Greek gods operate. No, when gods are offended, or, in Aphrodite's case, truly deeply wounded in their pride, subtlety is discarded almost immediately. There are no polite memos, no gentle suggestions. There is scheming, manipulation, and if necessary a well-timed act of chaos that makes even the most terrifying modern office politics look like a polite tea party. Enter Cupid, also called Eros in some tellings. Mischievous, winged, and notoriously unpredictable, Cupid was Aphrodite's son, and as his mother's little agent of love, he had a talent for causing chaos that could range from tender to catastrophic. Imagine a child with a bow and arrows that induce irresistible desire, given free rein in a world where gods hold grudges and mortals are defenceless. Yes, this is Cupid. Aphrodite, simmering with resentment at Psyche's unintentional affront, devised a plan that, in her mind, was perfectly elegant. If a mortal could not learn humility on her own, perhaps the appropriate education would be a love so frightening, so inconvenient and so incompatible that Psyche would come to understand her place in the grand hierarchy of beauty. In other words, Aphrodite intended to make Psyche fall in love with a monster, a creature so terrifying that the very idea of marriage, intimacy, or shared meals would be terrifying. Perhaps a dragon with scales like molten metal, a giant with the intellect of a particularly surly goat, or a chimera whose morning breath could knock out a centaur. You get the idea. It may comfort you slightly to know that this was hardly the first instance of gods meddling in mortal love affairs. Zeus, for example, had a habit of seducing women with less than subtle tactics, sometimes leading to heroic offspring or catastrophic floods. Hera, in her usual style, occasionally punished entire cities simply because someone flirted with Zeus. And let's not even start on Hades, whose romantic gestures tend to involve abductions to the underworld, a true nightmare scenario. Ancient Greek romance, it seems, came with a disclaimer: may include curses, kidnappings, or eternal suffering. Returning to our story, Aphrodite dispatched Cupid with a clear set of instructions, delivered with all the precision a goddess could muster. Use your bow, target Psyche's heart, ensure that she falls for something hideous, and, as a precaution, make it irreversible. Cupid, however, was not particularly attentive to precaution, and he had his own sense of whimsy, a trait that would soon complicate matters for everyone involved. Because Cupid, as it turns out, has a rather peculiar view of obedience. He is mischievous, playful, and occasionally empathetic toward the mortals his mother seeks to torment, which, as you might predict, sets the stage for a conflict of interest that is, in retrospect, entirely predictable, but nonetheless dramatic. Aphrodite, blissfully unaware of Cupid's tendencies, returned to her golden halls, confident that Psyche's romantic misfortune would soon restore the proper order of admiration. She did not foresee, of course, that sometimes the child of a meddlesome goddess has ideas of his own, ideas that might include falling in love, defying instructions, and, most audaciously, questioning the wisdom of punishing an innocent mortal at all. And so, the die was cast. The player pieces moved. Psyche, unaware of her impending trials, continued her daily life, blissfully ignorant of the divine scheming overhead. But behind the scenes, wings flapped, arrows twitched in quivers, and one very mischievous god prepared to make a choice that would forever alter the course of this mortal girl's life. It's worth noting here that ancient myths often teach lessons about human behaviour, but they also reveal a rather startling truth. Gods are, by design, capricious. Their plans can be thwarted, twisted, or entirely subverted by small acts of agency, cleverness, or just plain luck. Psyche, as it turns out, would soon discover that surviving divine interference requires not only courage, but a knack for interpreting instructions in the most literal and occasionally most inconvenient way possible. So as we drift further into this tale, consider the scene. A goddess fuming in her palace, a mischievous winged son with a bow and arrows, and a mortal girl whose life is about to become a series of trials and misunderstandings. All it takes is a spark, and an entire world of trouble, romance, and improbable heroics is set aflame. When we think of oracles, we often imagine a serene, knowing figure cloaked in mystery, dispensing wisdom with an air of gentle inevitability. In reality, ancient oracles were often a little more mischievous, and in Psyche's case, they were catastrophically effective at ruining lives. Psyche's parents, deeply concerned for their daughter's safety and future, decided to seek guidance from Apollo's oracle, the most famous and most cryptically tragic of all divine advisors. They hoped for advice, a morsel of reassurance, perhaps even a mild suggestion. Your daughter may marry well if she keeps her hair tidy. Instead, they received the kind of counsel that ensures your life will be forever altered. The oracle, after consulting the flames, the birds, or possibly just the right amount of incense, delivered its pronouncement: Psyche must be married to a fearsome beast. No further details, no safety instructions, no hints about temperament, just the phrase, hanging in the air like a particularly unpleasant fog. Imagine, if you will, trying to plan a wedding with that level of guidance. One might ask practical questions. What is the beast's preferred diet? Does it snore? Is it house-trained? But in the world of Greek mythology, questions are dangerous, curiosity is hazardous, and mortals rarely get to clarify details. Ancient oracles thrived on ambiguity. They spoke in riddles, half-truths and metaphors, leaving humans to puzzle out meanings that often led directly into trouble. A child might be told to avoid rivers and promptly fall into a well. A farmer might be warned of famine and then be forced to donate half his grain to appease the gods. The moral: never assume that cryptic advice is safe advice. In Psyche's case, fearsome beast was about to prove devastatingly literal. Reluctantly, Psyche's parents obeyed, trusting in the divine wisdom of Apollo. They led her to a cliff high above the village, with the wind tugging at her hair and the birds circling overhead. There, in a moment that was at once tragic and oddly ceremonial, Psyche was left alone. The villagers, who had once worshipped her for her beauty, now watched from a distance, murmuring prayers and nervously shifting their weight. And so it happened. Psyche was abandoned on a cliff, left to meet her fearsome beast, whatever that might entail. She did not protest, for obedience was ingrained, and mortals rarely defied the will of the gods or the pronouncements of the oracles. But one can imagine the chill of fear, the weight of uncertainty, and the strange, lonely sense of being both extraordinary and utterly vulnerable. It's worth noting that weddings in Greek myths often involve dramatic cliffside abandonments, sudden disappearances, and encounters with terrifying creatures. There's a certain pattern. The mortal bride is left in suspense, the gods watch amusedly, and chaos ensues. One might call it divine theatre, but for the humans involved, it's much more like a high-stakes obstacle course, with very little in the way of instructions or insurance policies. As Psyche gazed over the precipice, waiting for her unknown fate, the stage was set for the intervention of our mischievous archer, Cupid. He, of course, had been dispatched by his mother to ensure that Psyche's heart would fall into the wrong hands. But Cupid, as we know, has a mind of his own, and just as the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in molten oranges and purples, a new presence began to stir in the shadows, a presence that would change everything. Thus our story marches on, moving from mortal obedience and tragic cliffside abandonment toward an improbable, whimsical, and ultimately transformative romance. Psyche's trials were only beginning, and as we continue, we'll see that even the most fearsome instructions from an oracle can be subverted by courage, wit, and, in this case, a rather charming god with wings and a bow. Psyche awoke one morning, though perhaps morning is too mundane a term, to find herself swept away from the cliffside and transported to a palace that could only exist in dreams, or perhaps the imaginations of very indulgent gods. Marble floors gleamed as if they had just been polished by invisible hands. Fountains burbled with water so clear it seemed almost liquid crystal, and every hall echoed with the faint scent of flowers that, one might suspect, do not exist anywhere else on earth. In this palace, Psyche was treated with a kind of attention that would make even the most pampered mortal blush. Food appeared when she was hungry, silk sheets magically folded themselves, and servants moved silently like shadows. Yet, despite the grandeur, there was an unshakable mystery. Her husband, the architect of this luxury, never appeared in daylight. He visited only at night, and he had one strict rule. Psyche must never, under any circumstances, try to see him. No peeking, no sneaking a candle closer, no casual questions about eye colour or hair texture. Simply put, she was expected to trust a man she had never met, and had never seen, with her life, her heart, and apparently her continued well-being. If you stop and consider it, this is something like blind dating with zero lighting, no consent forms, and a minor risk of permanent heartbreak or divine retribution. Imagine being instructed to live in luxury with a stranger who insists on invisibility, while the world outside is still full of gossiping villagers, vengeful goddesses, and the occasional fatal misunderstanding. It's, in short, the ultimate test of trust. Despite the strangeness, Psyche adjusted. She slept in sumptuous chambers, wandered corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, and began to understand that her husband's absence during the day was not neglect. It was simply how this peculiar arrangement worked. He was kind, attentive, and unseen, delivering comfort and companionship in a manner that was both intimate and mysterious. And yet, the human mind is naturally curious. Psyche, like all mortals, found herself wondering, who is he? What does he look like? Why can't I see him? These thoughts, entirely ordinary, were also the seeds of inevitable tension. For in mythology, curiosity is rarely harmless, and rules imposed by gods and demigods are rarely suggestions. One might pause here to appreciate the subtle, psychological trial at play. The palace, the luxury, the nightly visits, all designed to cultivate dependence, trust, and obedience. And yet it is also a setup that preys upon the mortal need for certainty. Psyche's predicament mirrors a timeless human experience. Loving someone you cannot fully understand, trusting what cannot be verified, and resisting the urge to peek behind the curtain, even when every instinct tempts you otherwise. Her nights with her mysterious husband were quiet, tender, and filled with whispers. The rooms glowed softly in the moonlight, the floors seemed to hum underfoot, and the air carried faint music, as if the palace itself were alive, performing a lullaby for its guest. And through it all, Psyche learned to navigate her new life, balancing awe, gratitude, and the quiet tension of rules she did not fully comprehend. By now, you may see that Psyche's trials are not merely about survival, cleverness, or courage. They're about patience, restraint, and understanding the strange, often arbitrary logic of divine beings. And while this night-by-night routine seems calm, even serene, it is only a prelude to the challenges that arise when curiosity, human emotion, and divine secrecy inevitably collide. No tale of mortal misfortune is complete without the involvement of family, and Psyche's story is no exception. Enter her sisters, envious, sharp-tongued, and blessed with the uncanny ability to detect opportunity for disaster even from miles away. In many ways, they are a reminder that sometimes the most formidable obstacles in life come not from monsters or gods, but from relatives who simply cannot abide your good fortune. The sisters, upon hearing whispers of Psyche's luxurious and mysterious life, devised a plan that was equal parts curiosity, malice, and a touch of creative imagination. They came to visit, posing as concerned siblings eager to offer advice. In reality, they were carrying whispers and warnings like daggers. Psyche, this husband of yours, he is a monster, a fiend, surely capable of ending your life at any moment. You must protect yourself. History is, of course, littered with the unfortunate consequences of sibling advice. Cain and Abel, for example, took family rivalry to, well, the extreme. Tudor courts were a showcase of sibling manipulation and intrigue, often resulting in imprisonment, exile, or worse. Even in less dramatic households, sisters and brothers have long been capable of creating tension, sowing doubt, and encouraging decisions that, in hindsight, seem profoundly unwise. Psyche, it turns out, is heir to this venerable tradition. Under the careful insistence of her sisters, Psyche began to wonder whether the warnings might be true. Could it be that the invisible husband who visited only at night was, in fact, a terrifying creature disguised in divine luxury? The palace, once a haven of wonder, now seemed like the lair of a secret predator. Every whisper of silk, every flicker of candlelight became a potential sign of danger. And so Psyche, like many curious humans before her, began to plot. She would attempt to see her husband, not out of malice nor rebellion for its own sake, but out of a mortal desire to understand, to verify, to reconcile the paradox of love and fear. She prepared carefully, taking the advice of her sisters to heart, though she did not yet realize that this particular counsel came with consequences far beyond what any sibling could anticipate. It is worth pausing to appreciate the timeless pattern here. Even the most comfortable circumstances can be destabilized by doubt. Siblings, well-meaning or malicious, have long influenced decisions that shape destinies. From ancient myths to real-world dynasties, whispers and warnings from family have nudged people toward triumph or catastrophe, sometimes both in the same breath. Psyche's story is a reminder that curiosity, when combined with advice from potentially jealous relatives, is rarely harmless. With these thoughts in mind, Psyche waited for nightfall. The palace, bathed in moonlight, seemed to hold its breath. She approached the bed of her mysterious husband with trembling hands, a heart full of questions and a mind honed by both caution and curiosity. The arrow of sibling suggestion had been lodged firmly in her psyche, and it would not be easily removed. Thus begins the next stage of her trials, balancing trust with curiosity, obedience with impulse, and the very human desire to see and understand the person she had come to love, even when the rules dictated otherwise. The stage is set for the inevitable clash of mortal inquisitiveness with divine secrecy, a dance as old as mythology itself. The night arrived, as it inevitably does, carrying with it the soft hum of the palace and the muted whisper of Psyche's heart. She had rehearsed her plan countless times in her mind, imagining every possible outcome, except, perhaps, for the one that actually occurred. With a small lamp in hand, she crept toward the chamber where her mysterious husband awaited, the light flickering nervously as if it, too, were uncertain of the night's events. The plan was simple in theory. Just a glance, just enough to satisfy her curiosity and confirm that she was not in fact married to a dragon, a giant, or a particularly surly chimera. Surely a mortal could manage this without catastrophic consequences. Of course, mortal plans rarely survive contact with the divine, and in this particular case, the obstacle was not only the natural trepidation that comes with breaking a sacred rule, but the curious physics of hot oil lamps in enclosed spaces. History teaches us that humans have always been inventive, sometimes brilliantly, sometimes disastrously, and lamps fall into the latter category when gods are involved. Psyche lifted the lamp just enough to peer across the bed. Her eyes fell upon her husband, and the shock was immediate. He was not a monster, not a single monstrous claw, fang, or terrifying roar in sight. Instead, she saw the golden glow of his form, delicate wings folded behind him, and features that were at once youthful, mischievous, and undeniably divine. Cupid, her husband, lay there, sleeping, entirely unaware that a mortal was about to illuminate him. And then, disaster. A small drop of oil fell from the lamp, landing upon Cupid's shoulder. The heat, though mild by mortal standards, was more than enough to rouse a god, or at least a mischievous winged god with a sense of both pride and personal space. With a cry somewhere between surprise and indignation, Cupid leapt from the bed, wings flaring, and disappeared into the night. Psyche, heart pounding, lamp still in trembling hands, was left alone in the sudden quiet, the palace now seeming a little emptier, a little colder, and significantly more complicated. There is perhaps a lesson here about the interaction between hot oil lamps and immortal beings. Ancient myths are replete with similar accidents. A candle, a cauldron, or a brazier has been enough to provoke curses, chaos, or divine flight. In this particular instance, a single, perfectly ordinary drop of oil disrupted the carefully orchestrated routine of nightly visits and trust-building, reminding us that even tiny human errors can have disproportionately divine consequences. As Psyche stood there, the lamp trembling in her hand, she realized the magnitude of what had just occurred. Her curiosity, her trust in her sister's warnings, and her mortal desire to understand the unknown had collided with the unpredictable nature of a god. Cupid had vanished, leaving her with both knowledge and guilt. She now knew the truth. Her husband was not a monster. He was the very embodiment of love, mischief, and divine caprice. Yet knowledge, as it often does, came with a price. The palace, once a haven of mystery and comfort, had become a stage for unforeseen consequences, setting in motion a series of trials and reconciliations that would test Psyche's courage, ingenuity, and capacity for patience. And so the night ended with Psyche alone, lamp extinguished, heart heavy, and the understanding that curiosity, while natural, is rarely without cost, especially when gods, love, and hot oil lamps are involved. When Cupid fled into the night, Psyche was left in the palace that suddenly felt far too large, far too quiet, and far too full of unanswered questions. And so began a chapter of wandering, searching, and, as one might imagine, a fair bit of personal reflection, though reflection alone does not mend a broken heart or restore a vanished husband. Psyche left the palace, her feet carrying her over hills, through forests, and across sun-baked plains. She travelled along dusty paths where the only companions were the occasional shepherd, wandering goats, or the distant caw of a solitary crow. Every step was fueled by determination, powered by hope, and perhaps a small measure of stubbornness. After all, losing the love of a god, or at least a godly husband, was not an experience one simply accepts with grace. Travel in the ancient Mediterranean was, by modern standards, both laborious and unpredictable. Roads were little more than dirt tracks, often rutted from rain and travel. Bridges were rare, inns rarer, and maps were mostly guesswork combined with a generous dose of local gossip. Travellers relied on the goodwill of strangers, the mercy of weather, and the occasional bribe or blessing to make it safely from one village to the next. Psyche, armed with courage and heartbreak, was well equipped for the challenge, though perhaps not for the unexpected hazards of both mortal and divine interference. She crossed rivers where the current threatened to pull her boots right off her feet. She climbed cliffs where a single misstep could spell disaster. She slept beneath olive trees, whispered prayers to passing strangers, and sustained herself on whatever morsel she could find. And through it all she never wavered from her goal, to find Cupid, to regain the love she had glimpsed, and to restore the bond that had been so abruptly severed. It is worth noting that Psyche's determination is emblematic of a recurring theme in mythology, the mortal's resilience in the face of divine caprice. Time and again, heroes and heroines wander, search, and endure, driven not only by love but by the stubborn insistence that they deserve resolution, even if it requires trekking across a continent with little more than hope as a guide. Finally, after months, or perhaps mere days, for time itself is elastic when measured by narrative tension, Psyche arrived at the temple of Aphrodite. Its walls were white marble, gleaming in the sun, columns rising like fingers toward the sky, and the scent of incense hanging heavily in the air. She had arrived at the heart of the goddess's power, the very domain where her husband's mother reigned supreme, and immediately she realized that this was a grave mistake. For entering the temple was to step directly into the hands of the goddess whose wrath had caused all of this in the first place. Aphrodite did not welcome mortal interlopers with warmth or courtesy. To stand before her was to invite scrutiny, judgment, and, most likely, a series of impossible demands designed to test courage, ingenuity and endurance in equal measure. Psyche had arrived at the point in her journey where heroism, heartbreak, and divine absurdity all collided. Thus began the next stage of her trials, navigating divine wrath, completing tasks that seemed beyond mortal capability, and proving that love, determination, and cleverness could, against all odds, survive even the most unreasonable of obstacles. Psyche's arrival at Aphrodite's temple did not go unnoticed. The goddess, with her legendary beauty and notorious temper, assessed the mortal before her. It was immediately clear that no mere apology, explanation, or tearful plea would suffice. Aphrodite, in the spirit of divine efficiency, and perhaps a fondness for dramatic flair, decided that Psyche must prove herself through a series of seemingly impossible tasks. The first task was deceptively simple, sorting a mountain of grain. Each kernel, indistinguishable from the next to any mortal eye, had to be separated perfectly. Psyche, crouched at the base of the great heap, began the painstaking process. Hours passed, the sun rose and fell, and still the grain remained. And then, as if the universe, or perhaps the moral of all good stories, took pity, a legion of ants appeared, tirelessly ferrying kernels to their proper places. Psyche learned early that in myth, even the smallest creatures often have the largest impact. Impossible labours are, of course, a recurring theme in mythology. Heracles had his 12, each more arduous than the last. Odysseus encountered tasks that tested wits as much as strength, and in each case the hero or heroine discovered that persistence, cleverness, and the occasional friendly intervention were often more valuable than brute force. Psyche was about to learn the same lesson. The second task, collecting golden wool from murderous rams. These were not ordinary sheep. Their teeth were sharp, their eyes wild, and their disposition decidedly unfriendly. Psyche could not approach them directly without risking severe injury. Here again, aid arrived in a most unexpected form. Reeds whispered to her, guiding her to the safest path. The rams, perhaps respecting the natural order, or simply uninterested in the mortal in their midst, allowed her to gather the coveted wool without harm. The third task, fetching water from a dangerous river at the edge of the world. The river was swift, icy, and populated by rocks sharp enough to slice leather and perhaps ambition alike. Psyche's mortal strength was insufficient for the task, but help came from Zeus's eagle, a divine messenger and powerhouse who carried the vessel safely to her hands. Once again, she realized that the cosmos, while capricious, was not entirely unsympathetic. The fourth task was the most perilous of all, a journey to the underworld itself, to retrieve a box of beauty ointment from Persephone. Crossing the threshold into the land of the dead required courage beyond ordinary human measure. Shadows whispered. The air was heavy with the sighs of spirits, and the weight of mortality pressed upon her like a stone. Psyche followed instructions meticulously, resisted temptation, and returned with the box intact, though the journey left her both humbled and profoundly aware of life's fragility. There is a certain rhythm to these mythic tasks. Each one, while seemingly designed to punish, also allows the mortal to demonstrate ingenuity, bravery, and moral fortitude. The tasks are often absurd, the rules arbitrary, yet the underlying lesson endures. Success often requires a combination of human determination and a willingness to accept help when it comes. Whether guided by ants, reeds, or divine eagles, the path to triumph is rarely walked alone. Through these labours, Psyche transformed. No longer merely a mortal swept up by divine intrigue, she became an agent of her own destiny, clever, persistent, and surprisingly adept at navigating the absurdities of gods. And though Aphrodite's temper remained formidable, Psyche's reputation as a mortal who could survive the impossible began to take shape. By the end of her labours, Psyche had proven that courage, intelligence, and a touch of help from sympathetic forces could overcome even the most absurd obstacles. Yet, as with all great myths, the final chapters were still to come. love, reconciliation, and the delicate art of earning the favour of a goddess who did not forgive easily. By the time Psyche faced her final task, she had already sorted grain, collected golden wool, and wrestled with rivers dangerous enough to discourage any mortal traveller with sense. But Aphrodite's instructions carried one last, unmistakable note of divine cruelty. A journey to the underworld. Yes, the very realm of shadows, ruled by Hades and Persephone, where mortals rarely wandered and even less frequently returned without complication. Psyche, brave as she was determined, set out with the instructions in mind. Fetch a box of beauty ointment from Persephone. Simple in theory, terrifying in execution. She descended into shadowy valleys where the air felt thick and heavy, and the sunlight of the mortal world became a distant memory. Ghostly whispers filled the corridors of the dead, reminding travellers of their mortality at every turn. The ancient Greeks had a particular fascination with death and the afterlife. Hades was neither evil nor absent-minded. He was efficient, serious, and firmly uninterested in mortal complaints. Persephone, meanwhile, ruled alongside him with quiet authority, maintaining the delicate balance of life and death. And perhaps the most important rule to remember if you ever find yourself in the underworld: do not snack on anything. The stories are full of mortals who couldn't resist a bite of pomegranate or an apple, only to become permanent residents. Psyche, clever and cautious, kept this in mind at every shadowed turn. Arriving before Persephone, Psyche presented herself respectfully, following Aphrodite's instructions to the letter. The queen of the underworld, aware of the mortal's audacity yet intrigued by her courage, handed over the small box of beauty ointment. Psyche accepted it, thinking that perhaps, at last, her trials were nearly over. And of course, in keeping with the long tradition of human curiosity and a mythic tragedy, she could not resist one final glance inside. The box, seemingly innocent, was infused with divine magic, a warning ignored. The moment Psyche opened it, a sleep like death itself overcame her. She collapsed, the world fading into shadow, her body unmoving, her fate hanging in the balance between mortality and divine whim. Opening forbidden boxes, jars, or containers has long been a favoured trope in mythology. Pandora's box, Psyche's vial, or even tales of curiosity gone awry remind us that mortal inquisitiveness, while admirable, often invites chaos. In each instance, the lesson is clear. Sometimes the rules exist for reasons far beyond human understanding, and sometimes curiosity comes with a price that even the cleverest must pay. Thus Psyche lay, trapped in a sleep that mimicked death, the box at her side, and the palace of gods seemingly indifferent to her plight. Yet as in all stories of this sort, the narrative was far from over. Divine intervention, clever thinking, and the enduring power of love were poised to converge, promising that even the most harrowing trials could eventually lead to reconciliation, understanding, and of course, a bit of happily ever after. The moment Psyche collapsed into her death-like sleep, the world held its breath, or at least the part of the world that belonged to gods and mortals alike. Cupid, having fled after the oil lamp incident, did not linger long in divine sulkiness. His heart, though easily wounded by molten oil, remained steadfast in love. Upon learning of Psyche's peril, he acted with characteristic swiftness, mixing divine power with genuine tenderness. He retrieved Psyche from her death-like state, gently closing the box and laying it aside. With a touch of his hand, no mortal medicine could have worked so effectively. He healed the wound between them, the shock, the sorrow, and the small chaos that comes from disobedience and curiosity. Psyche awoke, her senses returning slowly, her mind filled with relief, wonder, and of course, the lingering lesson that one should perhaps be more careful around hot lamps and immortal spouses. It is worth noting that myths are particularly fond of rescues, especially when the hero or heroine has endured trials that test courage, morality, and cleverness. In this case, Cupid's intervention serves as both redemption and proof that love, though occasionally complicated by divine temperament or household mishaps, has a power beyond ordinary human reckoning. Yet the story was not yet complete. Zeus himself, the king of the gods, intervened, a reminder that even the highest-ranking divinities occasionally take notice of mortal perseverance. In a rare moment of divine leniency, he granted Psyche immortality, ensuring that her union with Cupid would not be bound by the fragile limits of mortal life. Suddenly, the mortal girl who had been the cause of Aphrodite's rage was now an immortal, recognized and reluctantly accepted by the pantheon of gods she had once dared to provoke. The gods, though they might have grumbled quietly in the background about her audacity, ultimately allowed the marriage to proceed. Psyche and Cupid were united in a bond both romantic and divine, a reminder that patience, bravery and cleverness, combined with a touch of love's magic, can overcome the most formidable obstacles. And the story did not end there. Their union bore fruit in the form of a daughter, Voluptas, also known as Pleasure. The cycle of love, trials, and eventual harmony came full circle, mortals and gods alike witnessing that perseverance, courage, and affection can yield joy, even after the most chaotic and absurd of adventures. Voluptas, as a personification of pleasure, serves as a symbolic conclusion to the story. Her birth reflects the rewards of enduring trials, the sweetness that follows hardship, and the small, quiet delights that make mortal and immortal existence worthwhile. In essence, the story of Psyche and Cupid closes with both literal and metaphorical life, joy, and the enduring power of love that transcends even divine caprice. Thus, after trials, mistakes, and a journey through both mortal and divine realms, Psyche and Cupid found their place in the world, together, immortal and accepted by gods who once doubted the mortal's courage. Love, cleverness, and determination had triumphed, and the cycle of myth carried forward, enriched by one mortal girl's remarkable journey. And so we arrive at the gentle conclusion of Psyche's story. Not a rush to the finish line, but a quiet reflection on the lessons that linger long after the gods have returned to their thrones, and mortals have returned to their lives. Psyche's journey, at its heart, is about love, the thrill, the missteps, the trials, and the small triumphs that come from persistence, courage, and yes, sometimes a touch of divine intervention. Yet intertwined with that love are the threads of jealousy, curiosity, and stubbornness. Aphrodite's envy, the sisters' meddling, and Psyche's own inability to resist peeking inside a box all serve as reminders that human nature and mortal foibles remain remarkably consistent through the ages. This myth endured for centuries for a reason. Roman retellings preserved the tale, Renaissance artists immortalized it on canvas, and modern stories, fairy tales like Beauty and the Beast for instance, echo the same lessons: the dangers of jealousy, the rewards of courage, and the unpredictable consequences of curiosity. It is a story of perseverance, love, and the small chaos that occurs whenever mortals and divinities share a narrative stage. Psyche's trials remind us that humans haven't changed all that much over the millennia. We still distrust siblings, despite the occasional good advice they may offer. We still ignore warnings that come with reason, curiosity overpowering caution. We still tinker with things we're told not to touch, whether that be boxes, forbidden knowledge, or the metaphorical locks on love and trust. The patterns of behaviour are timeless, and the story endures because we recognise ourselves in it, our mistakes, our triumphs, and our enduring fascination with the mysteries of life, love, and the occasional meddling god. So, as we close this chapter of Greek myth, we do so with a quiet acknowledgement. The story of Psyche and Cupid is more than a tale of divine caprice and mortal courage. It is a mirror reflecting human stubbornness, the joy and peril of curiosity, and the small victories that come from perseverance. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that love, cleverness, and courage are virtues worth celebrating, no matter how absurdly difficult the path may be. If you've enjoyed wandering through this myth with us, take a quiet moment to like the video and subscribe. And do let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always a little magical to see how this tale of love, jealousy, and hot oil lamps connects people across the world, even in the quiet of the evening. Today we're learning how one mortal woman waited 20 years for her husband to return, and lived to tell the story. This is the tale of Odysseus and Penelope, a story of enduring love, epic journeys, and a husband who might have just taken the scenic route a bit too far. We'll wander the Mediterranean, meet gods, monsters and temptresses, and explore the patience and cleverness required to survive the longest separation in Greek mythology. Before we set sail, take a quiet moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what we do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Settle in, get comfortable, and let's travel back to Ithaca, the seas and the islands in between, where one woman's loyalty meets one man's wanderlust, and where the gods, of course, have opinions about everything. Odysseus is gone. The Trojan War has claimed him for 10 years, or perhaps it just feels that way because Ithaca has slowly transformed into a bustling reality show without the cameras. The wind carries the scent of the sea through olive groves, gulls wheel lazily over the harbour, and everyone is vaguely wondering why they didn't just hire a vacation caretaker. At home, Penelope manages the household with the precision of a general and the patience of someone who knows exactly how long it takes for a suitor to eat all the good cheese in a single sitting. She has a son, Telemachus, old enough to notice things going missing, young enough to blame the dog anyway. Together they keep the palace running, though the halls echo with the presence of opportunistic suitors who consider manners optional and snacks mandatory. Penelope, however, is clever. She weaves a shroud during the day, a beautiful tapestry meant to honour her father-in-law, and unravels it at night. A slow, nightly ritual of sabotage. In effect, she has invented the ancient equivalent of procrastinating with purpose. Weaving wasn't just a chore. In Greek culture, it was a way to demonstrate skill, patience, and subtle passive aggression. A woman who could weave and unweave all day was essentially saying, "I see everything, I control everything, and yes, your impatience amuses me." Penelope's suitors, blissfully unaware, consume her food, drink her wine, and insult her servants, all while she quietly wins the domestic version of a strategic war. Telemachus watches, absorbing lessons in cunning and patience, though he occasionally wonders why he can't just hide the suitor's best drinking cups in a cupboard labelled "Do Not Touch," cursed by Athena. The boy is learning that subtlety is often more effective than yelling, a lesson Greek parents may have whispered to their children for generations, though often with less actual wine involved. The palace itself is an ecosystem of quiet comedy. The stone floors creak in rhythm with the footsteps of careless suitors. Olive-wood beams groan, as if silently judging everyone. The hearth smoulders in the centre, a comforting presence, smelling faintly of stew and faintly worse of someone forgetting that cheese can age badly. Penelope's quiet genius reminds us that heroism is not only measured in battles fought and monsters defeated. Sometimes heroism is measured in how long one can quietly unravel a shroud while the world insists on chaos around you. The suitors might be loud, obnoxious, and completely unaware of the subtle war being waged beneath their noses, but Penelope is winning, one knot at a time. So Ithaca waits, not for grand displays of heroism, but for the patient, clever actions of those who remain. Odysseus may be the hero of battle, but at home it is the quiet, steady cunning of a mother and her son that keeps the kingdom intact, all with a touch of humour, some well-placed knitting sabotage, and the occasional sigh at human folly. Before Odysseus could return to Ithaca, he had to survive 10 years of what we might politely call extremely extended vacation with very high stakes, also known as the Trojan War. The story is long, convoluted, and full of heroics, cunning, and the occasional questionable decision that would make modern HR departments faint. Odysseus distinguished himself not through brute strength alone, though he was no weakling, but through cleverness. He was the mind behind the Trojan horse, the original surprise gift that ends badly for the recipient. Imagine telling an enemy city, "Here, Take this massive wooden horse as a token of friendship, and then laughing quietly to yourself as armed men emerge from its hollow belly at night. Subtlety, strategy, and slightly questionable ethical decisions. Odysseus had them all. Greek warfare was as much about storytelling as it was about spears and shields. Bards would recount the clever tricks, the grand duels, and the heroic feats, sometimes stretching facts like a well-worn bowstring. Victory came with glory, but glory was expensive. Men returned home missing limbs, families grieved, and occasionally entire cities found themselves repurposed as history's cautionary tales. Trojan women wailed, horses were sacrificed, and Odysseus, like a man trying to finish a week's worth of errands in one day, managed the chaos with a mix of cunning and luck. Even among gods he was noted as clever. Athena, goddess of wisdom, favoured him, likely because she appreciated his strategic mind, and perhaps because she secretly enjoyed watching mortals squirm under clever tactics. Yet, for all the cleverness, war takes a toll. 10 years is a long time to be away from home, no matter how thrilling the adventures, and Ithaca did not wait politely in his absence. Each month away stretched into years. Letters were rare, though we suspect Odysseus would have fared poorly with a carrier pigeon service anyway. And so, as he fought and schemed in Troy, Penelope endured a different kind of battle at home, one of patience, resourcefulness, and quiet resistance. Heroism in this sense is a matter of perspective. Odysseus's heroism was visible, dramatic, and immortalized in song. Penelope's was invisible, domestic, and quietly infuriating to anyone who underestimated her patience. Both were necessary for the survival of Ithaca, though history remembers the spear-wielding more than the shroud unweaving. Through battlefields, deceptions, and a horse that should have been obvious to anyone with a sense of logic, Odysseus learned the value of patience, foresight, and occasionally the wisdom of not sharing your cleverest ideas until absolutely necessary. And the lesson, much like the slow weave of a shroud in Ithaca, is that survival often depends on cunning and observation, even when glory is screaming for attention. So, as we picture the smoke rising from the walls of Troy, the clang of bronze armour, and the chaos of victory turned disorder, we remember. War is exhausting, cleverness is dangerous, and coming home is sometimes harder than leaving. Odysseus's story has only just begun, and already the road ahead promises more trials than even the most ambitious traveller could reasonably anticipate. A thought that is, perhaps, comforting, if you like knowing someone else is in chaos while you sip your evening tea. Odysseus leaves Troy full of pride, clever plans, and the faint hope that the journey home will be less complicated than the last 10 years. He's wrong, almost immediately. The first stop is Maros, home of the Cicones, seems promising. A minor raid, a quick victory, and perhaps a snack along the way. But, as often happens when humans are involved, the simple plan goes awry. The Cicones fight back, and what began as a triumph quickly devolves into chaos. Men are lost, supplies are taken, and Odysseus learns, perhaps too late, that victory tastes best when followed by moderation. Greek stories love to remind us that even clever men are often terrible at pacing themselves. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of ordering a single slice of cake and eating the whole bakery. The thrill of victory can quickly turn into the misery of overreach, a lesson Odysseus seems destined to relearn, repeatedly, over the next several years. Next, they arrive at the land of the Lotus Eaters, where the danger is subtle, almost cosy. The lotus is sweet, addictive, and capable of making a person forget all sense of duty. Some men eat, forget home, and lounge in fields of blissful lethargy. Odysseus, ever the cautious leader, yanks his men back to the ships, sternly reminding them that forgetting home is not a recommended strategy for survival. No matter how pleasantly hazy the flowers may smell, there is something profoundly human in the temptation of forgetfulness. Even today we scroll endlessly through our distractions, luxuriating in small indulgences that take us further from responsibility. The Lotus Eaters are merely a metaphor, exaggerated for storytelling purposes, but the lesson remains: pay attention, keep moving, and do not dawdle too long in blissful inaction, or your crew may leave you behind. The mood of the journey is already established. Peril is constant, humans are fallible, and the gods are, at best, mildly amused by mortal foibles. Odysseus's men grumble, complain, and occasionally make poor choices, but they are loyal enough to follow him, which is remarkable given the disasters that seem to trail him like shadows at noon. The sea stretches endlessly in every direction, sun glinting off the waves during the day, turning into a shifting silver mirror at dusk. Nights are dark, stars scattered like spilled sand across a velvet sky. Every island is an unknown, every harbour a potential trap, and every calm moment carries the faint tension of impending catastrophe. The landscape is as beautiful as it is dangerous, a reminder that travel, even for the cleverest, is rarely uncomplicated. By the time the crew leaves the land of the Lotus Eaters, lessons are sinking in. Moderation is essential, distraction can be deadly, and cleverness, though invaluable, is no shield against human error. And, as Odysseus steers his ships onward, the first hints of divine displeasure begin to shadow the horizon. An ominous whisper of storms, shipwrecks, and encounters with creatures that are decidedly less hospitable than humans. The journey home, it seems, is not a single story, but a series of minor tragedies, clever escapes, and occasional moments of quiet beauty. Odysseus is not just fighting battles. He is learning patience, observation, and the subtle art of keeping men from wandering off to nap in fields of forgetfulness. For those of us watching, or listening, from a safe distance, it is a reminder that even the cleverest among us must negotiate chaos with humour, ingenuity, and occasional stern words. Odysseus and his men, eager for a safe harbour, stumble upon a seemingly quiet island. The land is rugged, dotted with caves, and the smell of sheep and saltwater hangs in the air. It's the sort of place you'd describe as perfect for a cosy picnic, if, of course, the local residents were not giant, one-eyed, and prone to sudden bursts of homicidal curiosity. Enter Polyphemus, the Cyclops. He is enormous, slow to hospitality, and has a taste for fresh, well-seasoned humans. Upon meeting Odysseus and his men, he traps them inside his cave, sealing the entrance with a rock that seems to require divine engineering just to budge. The situation is immediately tense and terrifying, but Odysseus, as always, relies on his cleverness. Odysseus hatches a plan. He offers Polyphemus wine, because wine, like cleverness, can soften even the most brutish temper, and once the Cyclops is drunk, blinds him with a sharpened stake. When Polyphemus cries out for help, he tells others that nobody is attacking him. A brilliant ruse and a lesson in subtlety, patience, and wide diplomacy sometimes involves literal blinding of one-eyed giants. Greek mythology enjoys showing that hubris is often punished. In modern terms, this is like texting your boss, "I am the best employee ever," immediately before a catastrophic printer jam. Odysseus's cleverness saves the day, but pride cannot be ignored. In a moment of vanity, he shouts his own name as he sails away, ensuring that Poseidon, Polyphemus's father, will never forget him. Hubris meet divine wrath. Divine wrath meet prolonged and very wet sea voyage. Jagged cliffs, crashing waves, and the smell of wet sheep hides the anxiety of men who suddenly realize that even cleverness has its limits. The sea beyond the island stretches endlessly, a mirror of uncertainty, and the sky darkens with the faint sense that this is only the beginning of Odysseus's troubles. Polyphemus is not just a monster. He's a reminder that travel in ancient times was unpredictable, that cleverness is indispensable, and that sometimes humans are punished simply for being too boastful. Odysseus learned the hard way that even a small misstep, or shout, can echo across the world, or at least across the Mediterranean, in ways that affect years of travel. As the men flee the island, clinging to sheep like the world's most uncomfortable life jackets, the story lingers on the absurdity of hubris, the tension of survival, and the gentle, mocking hand of fate. Odysseus's journey is not just about battles or monsters. It is a lesson in patience, planning, and remembering that even cleverness cannot replace caution. For the listener, there is a quiet satisfaction in imagining Odysseus's men, drenched, clinging to woolly backs, silently agreeing that the cleverness of their leader is as infuriating as it is necessary. And for Odysseus, the lesson is clear. Pride is an indulgence that can wait until you're safely home, ideally with all eyes intact. After the harrowing escape from Polyphemus, Odysseus and his men find themselves once again at sea, their nerves frayed and their patience thinning like an overused cloak. The Mediterranean stretches ahead, glittering deceptively, as if to say, calm today, chaos tomorrow. They arrive at the island of Aeolus, the god of the winds, who greets them with hospitality worthy of a minor deity, food, shelter, and a peculiar gift, a bag containing all the winds, tied up neatly like a cosmic parcel. Aeolus, in what may have been a subtle test of patience, instructs Odysseus carefully. Keep this bag closed, and you will reach home safely. Odysseus, ever the clever navigator, accepts the gift, imagining smooth sailing ahead. The men row with renewed vigour, dreams of Ithaca filling their heads. The wind blows favourably, the sun sparkles on the waves, and for a moment it seems that fortune may finally have a kind word for them. Greek myths often delight in minor catastrophes. A bag of winds seems simple enough, yet the story foreshadows human curiosity and impatience. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of being handed a box labelled "Do not open until home," and wondering if the label is a suggestion or a challenge. Inevitably, the men, convinced the bag contains gold or treasure, or perhaps just curious because humans are notoriously bad at following instructions, open it. The winds escape in a tumultuous gust, blowing the ships far off course. Suddenly Ithaca is no longer a nearby dream, but a distant, shimmering mirage. What should have been a smooth journey becomes another chapter in Odysseus's long catalogue of misadventures. The sea turns wild, waves like rolling mountains tossing the ships, salt stinging eyes, and sails flapping wildly. The sun dips, the stars appear distant and indifferent, and every man wonders how exactly a bag of winds could be so catastrophic. A question that will haunt Greek storytellers for generations. There is something inherently human about curiosity leading to trouble. Aeolus's gift, simple in its instructions, becomes a cautionary tale. Even clever leaders cannot always account for the impulsiveness of those they command. The story is both entertaining and instructive, a reminder that in travel, as in life, small errors can escalate into prolonged adventures. Odysseus tries to regain control, issuing commands, rowing tirelessly and cursing under his breath. The men, sheepish but loyal, follow. The chaos is punctuated by occasional laughter, not at the danger, but at the absurdity of being thwarted by a simple, overstuffed bag. Imagine, if you will, sitting on a cliff with a cup of warm wine, watching the Mediterranean dance below. Somewhere out there, a clever hero and his exhausted crew are flailing against invisible forces, learning patience and the value of following instructions. It is, perhaps, comforting to know that even heroes are humbled by minor disasters, and that the gods, while capricious, often have a sense of humour. By the end of their misadventure with Aeolus, the lesson is clear. Curiosity is both a gift and a curse, and the sea, like fate, cannot be fully tamed. Odysseus has learned, if only temporarily, that cleverness is essential, but caution, obedience, and humility are equally important. And so, the journey continues. Homesickness, divine interference, and human error all conspiring to make the return to Ithaca a story worth remembering, or at least worth recounting in cosy, sleep-inducing narration. After escaping the chaos of Aeolus's winds, Odysseus and his men finally reach the island of Aea, home to Circe, a woman of legendary beauty and even more legendary magical abilities. The air is thick with the scent of herbs, flowers, and something faintly singed, a subtle warning that all is not as it seems. The island is lush, sun-dappled, and entirely beguiling, as if nature itself conspires to lull travellers into complacency. Circe greets them with grace, hospitality, and a deceptively warm smile. The men, ever hungry and naive after so many trials, accept her invitation, only to find themselves turned into pigs, literally. This sudden transformation is, for the crew, the ultimate oops moment. 1 second you're a man, the next you're a snuffling, squealing swine. Greek myths are remarkably good at reminding us that curiosity can be hazardous. Imagine accepting a stranger's dinner invitation today, only to wake up as a porcine version of yourself. The ancients had a flair for exaggeration, but the underlying lesson is practical. Don't trust strangers, especially those who make their home out of enchanted herbs and mysterious potions. Odysseus, forewarned by Hermes, is immune to Circe's magic. He confronts her, wielding wit and divine guidance rather than brute force. Eventually a deal is struck. The men are restored, and Odysseus is invited to remain on Aea for a year. 1 year of comfort, strategy and planning, a luxurious pause in an otherwise perilous journey. The palace of Circe is part manor, part forest glade, with columns entwined in flowering vines, bird song filling every corridor, and pools of water that reflect both the sky and the hint of danger lurking beneath. Even mundane tasks, preparing food, walking through the gardens, carry a twinge of magical unpredictability. Every moment is infused with beauty, threat, and the subtle tension of the unknown. Circe represents both temptation and opportunity. Ancient Greek storytelling often uses her to explore the duality of desire, the comfort of ease versus the peril of indulgence. Odysseus learns a crucial lesson. Even in paradise, vigilance is essential, and cleverness is the key to survival. For the listener, there is a gentle moral nestled between the humour: trust wisely, act strategically, and never underestimate the power of a well-placed herb. During his stay, Odysseus hones his skills, engages in careful observation, and prepares for the next leg of the journey, a voyage that will test courage, loyalty, and cunning in ways he has yet to imagine. Circe herself becomes a subtle ally, offering guidance that is practical, indirect, and delivered with a knowing smile. Picture, if you will, the nights on Aea, soft moonlight spilling through open windows, the sound of waves mingling with the rustle of leaves, and Odysseus quietly strategizing while his men, grateful and restored, sleep peacefully. There is a peculiar comfort in temporary sanctuary, a reminder that even the most perilous journeys occasionally offer moments of calm, reflection, and gentle humour. By the time Odysseus and his crew depart Aea, the lessons are clear. Magic is real, caution is paramount, and cleverness remains indispensable. Circe, ever enigmatic, waves them off with a smile that suggests she knows their future adventures will be just as treacherous, if not more so, than the past. Odysseus departs Aea with his men, their spirits lifted but their journey far from over. The Mediterranean stretches before them, glimmering with calm waters that belie the dangers lurking just beyond the horizon. Greek mythology delights in turning ordinary travel into extraordinary peril, and Odysseus is about to experience the maritime version of a comedy of errors, with monsters. The first hazard, the sirens. These creatures are not merely beautiful, they are cunning, their song irresistible, promising knowledge, pleasure, and fulfillment. Sailors who hear the sirens' voices are drawn to shipwreck, entranced by promises they cannot resist. Odysseus, ever clever, plugs the ears of his men with beeswax, preserving their sanity, while he, tied to the mast, listens safely. The effect is mesmerizing, a lesson in curiosity, self-control, and the occasional virtue of being strapped down for your own good. Ancient Greek storytelling often rewards clever preparation over brute strength. In modern terms, this is akin to locking your phone in a drawer while writing a term paper. Temptation exists, but foresight saves you from disaster. Odysseus, for all his heroism, demonstrates that wisdom often involves restraint, a lesson for both sailors and students. Next comes the narrow strait where Scylla and Charybdis dwell. Scylla, a six-headed monster, snatches sailors from the deck, while Charybdis, a massive whirlpool, threatens to swallow the entire ship. Odysseus must choose his path carefully, risk losing a few men to Scylla, or risk total destruction by Charybdis. He chooses the lesser evil, sacrificing a handful to save the rest. A grim calculus, but one made with stoic pragmatism. The strait is narrow, the cliffs rising sharply from the sea. Waves crash violently against jagged rocks, spray stinging the sailors' faces, and the cries of the captured echo faintly over the water. The air smells of salt, fear, and the faint, unpleasant tang of the monster's domain. Every motion of the ship is tense, each decision weighted with mortal consequence. Greek myths are fond of presenting choices with no perfect solution. Odysseus's decision is a reminder that leadership often involves difficult compromises. For the listener, there is a subtle satisfaction in imagining the crew, tightly gripping the rails, silently acknowledging that cleverness cannot erase danger, only navigate it. And perhaps a quiet amusement in thinking that ancient sailors had far worse GPS problems than we do. Odysseus's careful manoeuvring allows the ship to survive, though not without loss. The men learn that courage, strategy, and a touch of luck are indispensable, and that sometimes survival depends on choosing the least catastrophic option rather than the ideal. Picture the crew finally making it past the strait, hearts racing, hair damp with spray, shaking in relief and exhaustion. They row a little slower now, savouring the calm moments between perils, reflecting on the narrowness of fate, and perhaps quietly agreeing that the siren's song, for all its promise, is better admired from a distance. As the sun sets and the horizon stretches ahead, Odysseus knows this is only the beginning of more trials. The sea is a constant teacher, punishing arrogance, rewarding preparation, and offering the occasional lesson in patience, always with a wry smile. After surviving the Sirens, Scylla and Charybdis, Odysseus and his crew sail on, weary but resolute. The sun beats down upon the deck, sparkling off the calm waters, and for a moment the Mediterranean seems benevolent. But Greek myths rarely allow heroes more than a moment of peace. Ahead lies Thrinacia, the island of Helios, the sun god, where temptation and divine wrath wait in equal measure. Helios keeps herds of sacred cattle on the island, animals of astonishing beauty and size, each one marked by the divine hand. Odysseus receives strict instructions: touch not a single beast. They are untouchable, and even the thought of harming them carries consequences too severe to fathom. The men nod, solemn, confident that they can resist such obvious temptation. Humans are remarkably bad at following instructions when food is involved. Greek myths exaggerate this tendency, turning simple disobedience into cosmic calamity. One imagines the men thinking, surely grazing a few cows won't anger a sun god. History, both mythical and mundane, shows that small lapses in judgment have a way of snowballing dramatically. Odysseus leaves the men on the island while he prays and deliberates. The temptation proves irresistible. Hungry, tired, and missing the comforts of home, the crew slaughters a few of Helios's sacred cattle while Odysseus sleeps. The act is swift, efficient, and disastrous. Smoke curls into the sky, carrying the unmistakable scent of divine offence. The island is a vision of golden fields, grazing beasts and sun-scorched rocks. The sea laps gently at the shore, oblivious to human folly, while shadows lengthen under the unrelenting sun. Each hoofbeat, each crack of a bone, resonates as a warning. Sacred laws exist, and their violation carries immediate consequences. When Helios discovers the transgression, the wrath is swift and unforgiving. Odysseus, awake to the horror, curses his men's greed and prays for mercy, but the god's punishment is absolute. Zeus hurls a lightning bolt, striking the ships and drowning all but Odysseus, who survives by clinging to debris in his indomitable cleverness. Greek myths delight in demonstrating the consequences of disobedience. This episode teaches multiple lessons. Divine instructions are not suggestions. Curiosity and hunger can be dangerous. and no amount of cleverness can entirely circumvent fate. For listeners, there is a cosy, almost voyeuristic amusement in watching human folly collide with cosmic power, a reminder that our ancestors like us struggled with patience, restraint and temptation. Imagine, if you will, Odysseus floating alone on a fragment of shipwreck, night falling, stars reflected on the calm waters. The silence is profound, interrupted only by the occasional lapping of waves. There is a meditative quality to survival after catastrophe, reflection, remorse, and the recognition that life, even for heroes, is fragile. And yet, there is also humour in the absurdity, the lesson etched into legend by overeager appetites and disobedient men. By the time Odysseus is carried by the sea to safety, the moral is unmistakable. Temptation may be universal, but consequence is equally absolute. The journey continues, a blend of cunning, patience, and enduring hope, reminding us that even in myth, human frailty is inescapable, and stories of survival are, at their heart, timelessly instructive. After surviving divine wrath and treacherous seas, Odysseus drifts to Ogygia, the island of the nymph Calypso. Unlike previous challenges, this trial is less about monsters or storms, and more about the subtle dangers of comfort and desire. The island is lush and inviting, with forests that shimmer in perpetual twilight, and streams that sparkle as if touched by magic itself. The air smells of wildflowers, salt, and something faintly intoxicating, a promise that even a weary hero might consider abandoning his journey altogether. Calypso herself is radiant, her beauty otherworldly, yet tinged with a melancholy that hints at the passage of time. She offers Odysseus immortality, eternal youth, and a life free from the burdens of mortality. To modern ears, it sounds like a vacation package with excellent benefits and a surprisingly permanent contract. Odysseus, weary beyond measure but ever devoted to home, politely declines, a decision that earns him both admiration and personal torment. Greek myths delight in testing human loyalty, often in absurdly convenient ways. One imagines Odysseus, after decades of war, storms and shipwrecks, thinking, "Sure, eternal comfort sounds nice, but I really should get back to Ithaca, even if it's just to see what the suitors are up to." Ancient storytellers knew that tension between desire and duty creates compelling drama, and, conveniently, keeps audiences listening. Time on Ogygia is both restorative and maddening. Odysseus wanders the island, reflecting on home, love, and the quirks of human ambition. Calypso offers companionship, counsel, and enchantments that make the days drift by almost imperceptibly. Yet the nymph's intentions are not malicious. She genuinely wishes to help him, illustrating a common theme in Greek myth. The divine is rarely malevolent, but mortal goals often conflict with divine desires. The island is a study in contrasts. Gentle waves lap at pristine beaches, sunlight filters through dense canopies, and hidden groves invite meditation and relaxation. Every sensory detail is heightened. The scent of fruit, the sound of bird song, the shimmering reflection of the sun on waterfalls, all designed to ensnare attention and patience alike. For a hero accustomed to constant danger, the temptation to pause, to linger, is profound. Calypso embodies the challenge of comfort versus duty. Greek myths often illustrate that the hardest obstacles are not storms or monsters, but the allure of ease and the seduction of what might be called perfect procrastination. Odysseus's restraint is instructive. Even the strongest hero can be tempted, yet the journey requires constant focus and moral clarity. For listeners, there is gentle humour in imagining a man who has survived war, shipwrecks and cyclopes, now negotiating the subtleties of polite refusal and personal loyalty. Finally, at the insistence of the gods, and after 7 years of enforced hospitality, Odysseus reluctantly departs. He boards a raft, leaving Calypso behind, her face serene yet tinged with sorrow. The moral is clear. Comfort and desire are potent forces, but the call of duty and home may outweigh even the most beguiling offers. Picture Odysseus setting sail at dawn, the island shrinking behind him, waves sparkling, and the wind gentle yet purposeful. There is a quiet satisfaction in leaving a paradise well lived, a lesson in balance and self-discipline. Even myths remind us that human perseverance guided by clear goals and modest humour can navigate the most enchanting of distractions. After departing Ogygia, Odysseus drifts across the open sea, exhausted, hungry, and weighed down by years of adventure and misfortune. The gods, always amused by mortal trials, guide him to the shores of Scheria, home of the Phaeacians, a people renowned for their seafaring generosity and rather comfortable lack of worries. The Phaeacians receive Odysseus with remarkable hospitality, a Greek virtue taken seriously. He is welcomed into a palace of gleaming marble, gardens lush with fruit and flowers, and halls echoing with laughter and music. It is a scene of leisure and abundance, a rare respite in a life defined by storms, monsters, and divine meddling. Hospitality in Greek culture, or xenia, is no small affair. Guests are offered food, drink, entertainment, and even stories. In modern terms, it's as if Airbnb, fine dining, and Netflix merged into one elaborate socially mandated experience, with divine oversight, naturally. Odysseus, used to rough seas and suspicious hosts, is likely both bewildered and delighted. The Phaeacians are curious, polite, and skilled in the art of listening. They coax Odysseus into recounting his adventures, from the sack of Troy to the perils of the sea, from cunning tricks to brushes with divine wrath. The narrative is extensive, an oral epic within an epic, and Odysseus's storytelling earns him admiration, food, and a safe journey home. The palace is a study in contrasts: polished floors reflecting sunlight, soft cushions on every seat, fountains trickling gently, and tapestries depicting maritime triumphs. Outside, ships gleam in the harbour, their hulls sleek and seaworthy. The air smells of baked bread, salted fish, and the faint perfume of laurel and thyme. Every corner, every sound, every scent reinforces the notion that these people have mastered both hospitality and comfort, a challenge to a hero accustomed to sand, sweat, and sea spray. Greek myths delight in highlighting human virtues through contrasts. Odysseus, a man hardened by misfortune, encounters a society where abundance and kindness are natural, not earned. For the listener, there is amusement in imagining a hero recounting tales of horror and loss to an audience that is entirely unshocked. Polite claps, sympathetic nods, and carefully timed interjections of admiration. The Phaeacians provide Odysseus with provisions, safe passage, and ships sturdy enough to carry him to Ithaca. Their generosity is both practical and moral. It ensures that the hero survives to fulfill his story, a reminder that human cooperation and kindness can influence fate almost as much as cunning and courage. Picture the evening in the Phaeacian palace, Odysseus reclining on cushions, the warm glow of oil lamps casting gentle shadows, music drifting softly from the hall, and the occasional servant offering honeyed wine or fruit. It is a quiet interlude, a pause between perils, where reflection, laughter, and minor indulgences remind us that even in myth, life contains moments of rest, and that storytelling itself is a form of comfort, a bridge across isolation and danger. By the time Odysseus departs, laden with gifts and advice, the audience sees the subtle lesson: preparation, hospitality, and social grace can be as powerful as divine favour or martial skill. The journey continues, but with the reassurance that even heroes benefit from generosity in a well-timed story. At long last, Odysseus arrives in sight of Ithaca, the island that has occupied his heart and imagination for 2 decades. The sun rises over jagged cliffs, illuminating familiar beaches and olive groves. For a moment one might imagine the hero dropping anchor, sprinting ashore and embracing his wife and son. But Greek myths, and the gods who oversee them, rarely allow straightforward reunions. Athena intervenes, shrouding Odysseus in disguise. He is no longer the battle-hardened king of Ithaca, but a beggar. Cloak frayed, face shadowed, demeanour humble. This ruse serves multiple purposes. It protects him from the suitors who have overrun his home, and allows careful observation of the situation in his household. In other words, Odysseus must sneak in as if attending the most perilous and socially awkward costume party imaginable. Disguises are a recurring motif in Greek myth. Gods, heroes, and mortals alike use them for cleverness, deception, or outright survival. One imagines Odysseus, a man accustomed to epic battles and divine schemes, now worrying whether his shoes match, if his cloak is convincingly ragged, or if a suitor will recognise the twinkle in his eye. The stakes are absurdly high, but the drama is irresistible. Odysseus takes stock of his home. The palace is noisy, crowded, and chaotic. Suitors lounge about, drinking wine, eating meat, and treating the household as if it were their inherited kingdom. Servants move quietly, aware of the brewing storm, while Telemachus, still young but growing, begins to sense that something extraordinary has returned. The halls smell of old wood, olive oil, and incense. Tapestries depict hunting scenes and past triumphs, now overshadowed by the suitors' careless feet. Outside, the terraces overlook the sea, glinting in the morning sun, and the gardens are half-tended, a reminder that maintenance has lapsed under occupation. Every detail paints a picture of a household in stasis, waiting for its rightful master to reclaim order. Odysseus begins forming a plan. He gauges who can be trusted, who must be tested, and how best to reveal himself. Athena offers guidance, emphasizing patience, cunning, and timing. This stage of preparation is critical, a slow, meticulous plotting that highlights the hero's intelligence as much as his martial skill. Greek myths delight in illustrating that homecoming is rarely simple. Even after surviving gods, monsters, and decades at sea, Odysseus must navigate domestic politics. The hero's journey continues not only in the open world, but within the walls of his own home, a reminder that leadership requires observation, strategy, and occasionally, a willingness to pretend you are someone else entirely. Picture Odysseus seated in the shadows of his own hall, listening to laughter, footsteps, and conversations not meant for him. There is a certain quiet satisfaction in understanding, planning, and awaiting the perfect moment. It is a pause in the epic, a contemplative interval where reflection, patience, and subtle humour coexist with anticipation. As the sun climbs higher, Odysseus and Telemachus secretly coordinate, sharing words and gestures known only to father and son. The stage is set for the confrontation to come, a reckoning that will restore order, reward loyalty, and demonstrate that cunning, patience, and careful observation are as heroic as brute strength. With careful observation and Athena's quiet guidance, Odysseus prepares to reclaim his home. The key is a bow and arrow, a weapon he alone can string and wield with deadly precision. It is no ordinary piece of equipment. It is both a test and a symbol. To the suitors, it represents amusement, arrogance, and a challenge they believe they can master. To Odysseus, it embodies justice, skill, and the long-awaited return of order. Penelope, ever clever, announces a contest. Whoever can string Odysseus's bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads will win her hand. The suitors, overconfident and unaware of the beggar in their midst, eagerly attempt the feat. Their efforts are clumsy, their muscles strained, and their faces red with exertion. One might imagine them thinking, surely the bow is tricky, but who couldn't do this after years of lounging and drinking wine? Greek myths often use contests to dramatize skill, patience, and divine favor. The absurdity of grown men flailing at Odysseus's weapon for a prize, unaware that the rightful owner is in their midst, creates both tension and comedy. It is a reminder that human arrogance, especially in the face of patience and wisdom, rarely goes unpunished. Odysseus, still in disguise, waits for the perfect moment. His movements are calm, measured, and deliberate. When he finally takes up his weapon, the action is smooth, almost imperceptible in its elegance. The arrow flies true, slicing through all 12 targets in one unbroken line. Silence follows, punctuated only by the gasps of the suitors and the quiet, approving glance of Athena. The hall is alive with anticipation. Sunlight filters through high windows, casting warm rectangles across stone floors. The suitors shuffle nervously, glancing at each other and at Odysseus, oblivious to the precise eye of the man in their midst. Tapestries rustle as servants move cautiously, and the distant sound of waves against the shore is a subtle reminder of the world beyond Ithaca. Every detail heightens tension and ensures the moment feels both intimate and epic. With the contest concluded, Odysseus reveals himself. Shock ripples through the suitors, who had assumed the beggar harmless and weak. The hall transforms from a scene of casual arrogance into one of impending reckoning. Odysseus, aided by Telemachus and loyal servants, swiftly enacts justice. Each arrow, each decisive movement is deliberate and precise. The result is total, restoring the moral and social order of the household. Greek storytelling often combines spectacle with morality. Here, skill, patience and cunning are rewarded, while arrogance, indulgence and overconfidence meet swift consequences. For the listener, there is amusement in imagining the suitors' faces as their efforts fail, juxtaposed with the calm mastery of the man they underestimated. It is heroic, satisfying, and oddly cosy in its justice. Picture Odysseus and Telemachus moving quietly among the suitors, coordinating their actions, ensuring no loyal household member is harmed. There is satisfaction in precision, a kind of quiet joy in seeing long-planned strategy unfold perfectly. Even in moments of violence, there is a sense of order restored, lessons learned, and domestic peace carefully negotiated, all wrapped in the warm, lingering shadows of Ithaca's halls. With the suitors defeated, the household begins the slow work of restoration. Odysseus is no longer merely a survivor. He's the rightful master of his home, the arbiter of justice, and the clever hero whose patience and cunning have finally been rewarded. The stage is set for reunion, reflection, and the gentle restoration of domestic life. After years of separation, uncertainty, and scheming suitors, Odysseus finally stands face to face with Penelope. The moment is not a grand theatrical reunion as one might imagine in a modern film. It is quieter, slower, and laden with the subtle tension of decades apart. Penelope, ever cautious and clever, tests him, not with trials of strength, but with small, intimate questions that only the true Odysseus could answer. Greek myths often delight in slow reveals. Even the hero's identity requires proof. Imagine the internal monologue. After 20 years at sea, battling gods, monsters, and bad sailors, I must now pass a pop quiz on our bed's construction to prove who I am. It is both absurd and deeply human, the need to confirm trust, love, and identity in the midst of relief and joy. Odysseus recounts details of their shared home, the bed he carved from an olive tree, and other intimate recollections. Penelope listens, gauging, nodding, and finally allowing herself to relax. Their reunion is not just romantic, it is domestic, practical, and profoundly personal. The household, long disrupted by absent leadership, begins to settle into order. The palace of Ithaca breathes again. Courtyards echo with measured footsteps, the hearth burns steadily, and the scent of olive oil and sea breeze mingle. Servants move with purpose, cleaning, cooking, and restoring domestic rhythm. Telemachus, now grown, observes and assists, learning leadership, patience, and filial respect. Even the walls, adorned with tapestries depicting past glories, seem to exhale relief. Here, the hero and his family restore normalcy not with a flourish of magic or immediate extravagance, but through careful observation, small acts of trust, and recognition of each other's roles. There is humour in imagining a hero, fresh from monsters, now negotiating household routines, discussing olive harvests, and teaching Telemachus the finer points of management. Picture the evening in the restored palace. A gentle fire glows in the hearth, casting soft shadows. Odysseus and Penelope sit close, quietly sharing memories and stories. Telemachus practices sword drills in a distant courtyard, and servants move softly through halls, whispering updates on preparations for the next day. It is domesticity as triumph, calm, restorative, and quietly heroic. As night falls, the family gathers for a modest meal: bread, olives, cheese, and fish. Conversation flows naturally, punctuated with laughter, minor complaints, and gentle teasing. This is the work of living, the rhythm of life regained, and a profound reminder that even the greatest heroics are ultimately aimed at restoring human connection, trust, and comfort. By the chapter's end, Odysseus is more than a returning hero. He's a husband, a father, and the steward of Ithaca's household. Peace has returned, not as a dramatic flourish, but as a steady, enduring rhythm, a fitting conclusion to years of hardship, cunning, and divine interference. With Ithaca restored and the family reunited, it is worth pausing to reflect, not on epic battles or divine interventions, but on the quieter lessons embedded in Odysseus's long journey. For those of us lying in bed and listening, these insights are as compelling as any monster or storm at sea. Loyalty, for instance, is a recurring theme. Odysseus's fidelity to Penelope, despite Calypso's island comforts and the siren song of immortality, demonstrates endurance and commitment. Penelope's loyalty mirrors his, weaving and unweaving the shroud, navigating suitors, and managing a household single-handedly for years. The human heart, when steadfast, provides its own kind of heroism. Greek myths are full of cautionary tales about poor decision-making. One might imagine a modern Odysseus thinking, "I survived a Cyclops, a year of Circe's hospitality, and a journey through the underworld, but I still have to teach my son to do chores." Even heroes, it seems, cannot escape mundane domestic responsibilities. Cunning and cleverness are equally celebrated. Odysseus's strategic mind, patience, and use of disguise underscore that intelligence can be as powerful as brute strength. From feigning madness at the war's outset to plotting the downfall of the suitors, his journey teaches that careful planning and observation often determine survival more than sheer force. Consider the human tendency toward hubris, curiosity, and indulgence. The suitor's overconfidence, the lotus eater's forgetfulness, and even Odysseus's brief hubris with Polyphemus serve as reminders that human behaviour rarely changes. We overestimate ourselves, test limits, and learn, sometimes painfully, the consequences of misjudgment. One might imagine the quiet moments in Ithaca after all the chaos. Odysseus watching the sun dip behind olive groves, Penelope tending her household, Telemachus practicing skills for future responsibility. These moments are intimate, reflective, and quietly triumphant, the rewards of enduring trials, employing patience, and valuing cunning as much as courage. Finally, there is the enduring appeal of story itself. Greek myths survived centuries because they combined human folly, cleverness, love, and perseverance in ways that remain relatable. We recognize ourselves in these tales. We navigate obstacles, test limits, learn from mistakes, and occasionally enjoy a touch of poetic justice. Odysseus's journey demonstrates that heroism is multifaceted. It is strength and intelligence, endurance and patience, loyalty and cunning. And perhaps most importantly, it is about finding one's way home, physically, emotionally, and morally. The story endures because humans continue to wrestle with the same challenges: trust, temptation, curiosity, and the delicate balance between action and reflection. As you drift towards sleep, consider these lessons in quiet reflection. The world of gods, monsters, and epic journeys may feel distant, but the human themes are timeless. Loyalty, cleverness, endurance, and patience. These are the virtues that carry us through our own storms, long journeys, and unexpected adventures. And so, dear listener, Our long voyage with Odysseus and Penelope comes to a close. We have wandered through storm and sea, through monsters and myths, and finally found ourselves back in the quiet hearth of Ithaca, where loyalty, patience, and a good night's rest prove to be the greatest treasures of all. If you've enjoyed drifting along this story, I invite you to linger a little longer in this channel. There are more tales waiting for you, some heroic, some peculiar, all delivered at a pace that is, frankly, better suited for sleep than for battle. If you'd like to hear more, you can subscribe so you won't miss the next weary historian's ramble. And if Odysseus's tale lulled you toward dreams tonight, perhaps a gentle like or a comment sharing your favourite part will help guide future voyages. But for now, close your eyes. The suitors have been driven away, the house is quiet, and Ithaca is at peace. Thank you for listening, and until next time, may your dreams be free of storms, sirens, and unsolicited Greek gods. Good night.